Welcome to our class on Chassidus. We're going to be learning a beautiful Chassidic discourse from the Rebbe. The name of the Chassidic discourse is called Achodesh Hazeh Lachem. The Rebbe said this Chassidic discourse, Mitzvah Shabbos, a Parshas Vayakel Pikudei, which was also Parshas Achodesh, which was also the 25th day of the month of Adar, in the year Tafshin Lametes, 46 years ago. The Rebbe went on to certify and edit this Chassidic discourse in honor of Parshas Achodesh, which was the 25th day of Adar, which is the anniversary of the Rebbetzin Chaim Mishka's birthday in the year Tafshin Memtes, 36 years ago. So again, the Chassidic discourse is based on the verse where it says in the Torah, Chodesh Hazeh Lachem, this month, referring to the month of Nisan, Rosh Chadashim is the head of all the months, Rishon Hu Lachem L'Chadshei Shana, it's the first of the months of the year. So Rebbe brings what the previous Rebbe brings on a Chassidic discourse with this title, and he said this Chassidic discourse when he came to America. So he brings what it says in the Targum Yonasan, based on the verse in the prophets where it says B'yerech Sonim. So it says that it's referring to the 7th month. What is the 7th month? So the Targum says it's referring to what? The month of Tishrei. So it says over there, the Atikoi originally, this month, the month of Tishrei, the month of we have the Yom Tovim, was the first month. Originally, it was the first month, and now it became the 7th month. In other words, what does that mean? That before Hashem gave the Torah, so Tishrei was the first month. Why was it the first month? Because that's the month Hashem used to create the world. And now, after we left Egypt, and we see the Torah, so Nisan becomes the first month, and Tishrei is the 7th month. And he points out over there that since Tishrei was originally the first month, so why all of a sudden is Nisan becoming the first month? Now, if you're going to say it's because of the redemption that took place in the month of Nisan, so we also have to understand the fact is the beginning of the redemption was in the month of Tishrei. Because on Rosh Hashanah, the first day of Tishrei, the Jewish people already stopped the labor in Egypt. So why is the month of redemption referring to specifically the month of Nisan? And there was just to point out, in many Chassidic discourses, the point they bring out is as follows: that Nisan is the head of all the months. That Nisan is the head of all the months, and Tishrei is the head of the year. In other words, the first day of Tishrei is the head of the year, because even now, even after we left Egypt, and even after we see the Torah, Tishrei is the beginning of the year, versus Nisan is the beginning of the months. So in other words, why is it called Rosh Hashanah? Because it's the head that everything in the year is included in it. Just like the head, all the energy from the whole body, all the limbs come from the head. And so the same thing also, Tishrei is the head of the year, and afterwards it gets divided up into 12 months, and every month, depending on the month, whether it's 30 days or 9 days, or 29 days. So in other words, so therefore the energy of the month of Nisan comes from the beginning of the year, which is Tishrei. But over here he says that Nisan is actually the head of the months, and the head of all the months of the year, even in reference to the month of Tishrei. So they explain over there as follows: that the energy that comes in the month of Tishrei, that comes for the whole year, so the energy of Tishrei is finite. And that's generally referring to the energy that gets enclosed in the creation and the people that were created in an internal way. It's finite. And that's the source of nature that exists in the world. That's coming from Tishrei. And that the month of Nisan is called the head, it's referring to the energy of Oirein Seif Habligvul, the infinite part of Hashem. And that's the source of all the miracles which are above nature. So based on this difference, they explain that Tishrei is the beginning of the year, Rosh Hashanah, and Nisan is the beginning of all the months, because the way nature operates, which basically means it's always equal, that's like the way the sun operates. And like the idea of Shana, years, comes from the word Mishnah, which means the thing keeps on repeating itself. The same thing repeats itself over and over again. However, when it comes to the operation of miracles, What's a miracle? It's something totally new. Like we know, Hashem sometimes changes things up. So that's compared to the idea of the moon, because basically the moon every single month comes new. So then that's why one of the reasons why month, which is in Hebrew is a chodesh, comes from the same words as chiddush, something new. So you can say that this is why he points out in the Chassidic discourse that before we left Egypt, so Tishrei was the head of all the months. Because Nisan became the head of the months only when we left Egypt. But before we left Egypt, Tishrei was also, besides the fact that it was the beginning of the year, it was the head of all the months. What is he pointing out? Before we left Egypt, so the Tishrei was the first of drawing in energy which is above nature as well. And as we see, the fact is, how did we go out of Egypt? We went out of Egypt from the energy of Tishrei, and so if that's the case, that since initially everything came from Tishrei, meaning is the infinite part, and the finite part came from Tishrei, because otherwise we wouldn't have left Egypt, so why is it now that Nisan switched over to be the first? Tishrei does have the power of infinite in there. So what he tried to explain was that Tishrei is nature and Nisan is infinite. But the fact is, how did you come to going out of Egypt? So obviously Tishrei had it as well. So the question is, why did it switch over to Nisan? So he says the point of the explanation, like to explain that Chassidic discourse, is that even when it comes to months, Chodesh, which comes to the idea of a chiddush, something new, which generally speaking, it's drawing in the light which is above, so to speak, the world, which is basically the months which comes after Egypt, is much higher than the months beforehand. So in other words, there's two different revolutionary ideas of chiddush, of above nature. There's one level which comes from Tishrei, and that's the cause of going out of Egypt, but then there's a whole different level which we got from Nisan. What does that mean? He explains as follows. The revelation that took place through the work of the patriarchs, which was before the going out of Egypt, and also all the signs and the miracles that took place in Egypt, and besides the fact, and also including the fact that on the month of Tishrei we stopped working in Egypt, that comes from a level of light which is above nature, but it has a connection to nature. And this light itself, the source of all the miracles comes from the light which is above coming into the world, but has a connection to the world. And that's why the miracles that took place where we're in the land of Egypt, and Egypt in Hebrew is called Mitzrayim, which comes from the expression of Meitzer and Gvul, limitations. Why? Because the general idea of the light, which has a connection to the world, even if it's above getting enclosed in the world, it's still finite. And when we left Egypt, then we had the revelation of the essence of the part of Hashem which has no connection to the world. And that's how we were able to leave Egypt. It was leaving all the Mitzarim and Gvulim, all the limitations, all the boundaries, even from the greatest boundaries that exist. So what do you see from here? That before we left Egypt, even the idea of the months, which again, months is a revolutionary idea that it existed, but they're months that are connected to creation of the world. But the true idea of a month, which is new, something totally new, that we got after we left Egypt. And like we see that the 12 months that are connected to the world, creation, so their source is in the 12 permutations of the name Adonai of Hashem. On the other hand, the 12 months, which is above creation, that source is from the 12 permutations of the name Yud Kei Vav Kei of Hashem. I never said he liked to connect this with what's explained in the Chassidic discourse, that you can say the difference between regular months to the months of the year. In other words, the months of the year, even though they're revelations above nature, like Chadashim months, Chiddush, something new, but they have a connection to the world. They have a connection to the world and nature. And then you have regular idea of a month. It's not a month of the months, which basically is the idea of revelation, which is above connecting to the world. And that's why before the Jewish people left Egypt, Tishrei was the first of the months, and now Nisan becomes the first of the months. Why? Because drawing in the light which is connected to the world was connected to the idea of Tishrei, which that's will use to create the world. But however, in order to bring in the essence of the infinite part of Hashem, which is higher than the world, that specifically came through the idea of the month of Nisan, which is the month of redemption. Rabbi says, 1 second, we have to understand. Based on what we just learned, what comes out, that after Hashem took us out of Egypt, so then the month of Nisan is Rosh Chodashim. That means it's only connected to the idea of the month which is above the world. In other words, which basically is connected to the 12 permutations of Yud Kei Vav Kei, which basically is the revelation of the infinite part of Hashem, which has no connection to the world. So that would be a nice answer. It makes sense. However, when you look into the Targum that we learned before, that it says that originally it was called the first month, and now it's the seventh month in terms of the month of Tishrei. So in other words, that Nisan now is first. It's also in relation to the idea of the months that originally Tishrei is first. In other words, on a spiritual level, even in reference to the months that are connected to the 12 permutation of Adonai, which basically is connected to the infinite part of Hashem, which is connected to the world. And the same thing also is understood that the counting in the months in Torah always starts from the month of Nisan. Because, for example, Iyar is the second month, Sivan is the third month. And it was after we left Egypt and after we received the Torah, so Nisan becomes the first in reference to everything. Not only that, even the Torah portions that took place before Parshas HaChodesh, and since all that is part of Torah that were given to us later on after we left Egypt, and the matter of fact, the first commandment of Hashem, Anoichi, that took us out of Egypt. So knows the counting in the months, it doesn't come from Nisan, from Tishrei, it comes from Nisan. So you see that once it's shifted, everything is connected to the idea of Nisan. So he says, so seemingly you can say, you can explain it based on what it says, what it says in the Chassidic discourse, that after it says Achodesh Zeh Lachem Reish Chodashim, he adds Rishon Hu Lachem L'Chodshei Hashana. So you can say as follows: that Chodshei Hashana, the months of the Hashana of the year, which means the months that are connected to the year, that's the revelation that gets drawn into the world, into the finite world. But this that he says, Rishon Hu Lachem L'Chodshei Hashana, knows that in the Jewish people, Lachem, we should have the revelation of godliness which is higher than Nisan, which is Nisan, even into the months. But there was 1 second. The fact is, we still have to understand. In other words, this idea that in the Jewish people, that in our nature, we have to feel and receive a revelation of above nature. So that's an explanation that after we left Egypt, that all the months are connected to Nisan. But what's the reason that the counting of the months, the months now is still from Nisan, not from Tishrei? Why is that? Because since the months of the year, they're revelations that are connected to the world. And initially, it was connected to the idea of Tishrei. Tishrei was the first initially. So why is it shifted that now everything comes from Nisan, and Nisan becomes the head of the months and even the months of the year? Because even now, and it was even in the Jewish people, that in our nature, what are we feeling? That God is infinite above the world. But nevertheless, Rosh Hashanah is still connected to Tishrei. Okay. So now the Rebbe is going to explain. He says as follows. We're going to understand this based on what Chazal tell us, that the Torah really should have started with Achodesh Zeh Lachem. It's the first mitzvah. So why does he start with Bereshis? In the beginning, he tells us the whole story of creation, because he wants to tell us the power of Hashem, that Hashem created the world, and he gave the land of Israel to the Jewish people. Because the nations of the world are going to come saying, you're thieves, you stole the lands. No. Ever Hashem created the world, he created it, and he gives who he wants. Okay. Now, that's the teaching from the Medrash. So we know the famous question that's asked. 1 second. What's the question? That the Torah should have started with Chodesh in the first mitzvah. But the fact is, even though the beginning Hashem created the world is the source of the faith in Hashem. In other words, that the idea of the creation and everything that comes afterwards, until Parsha Chodesh, that will be, so to speak, given over orally, or it will be written, so to speak, in a different book, but not necessarily in the Torah. Why? Because Torah is all about commandments and instructions to the Jewish people. So therefore, the Torah should have started with what? With the first mitzvah, Chodesh Hashem. So, and what's the answer? Because the reason why it's in the Torah to tell the nations of the world, Hashem created the world, Hashem maintains it, and He can give it to whoever He wants. The fact is, even was given over orally, we'll know what to answer the nations of the world. But again, back to the question: why doesn't the Torah start with a Chodesh? Also, we have to understand, Torah is above the world. So we're saying, in order to answer the nations of the world, we're going to change the Torah. That should start with Bereshis. And even though it should have started with a Chodesh, why is it starting with Bereshis? So what's the explanation? The point of the explanation is, that the Torah should have really started with a Chodesh, because the fact is, all the revelations that took place in the world until God took us out of Egypt, and that speaks about until the Parsha Chodesh, is all light which is connected to the world. However, Torah is drawing in a revelation of the infinite part of Hashem, which is higher than the world. So up until Matan Torah, light connected to the world. Afterwards, light above the world. So therefore, it should have started with a Chodesh, which is connected to going out of Egypt, and that started the revelation above a part that comes into the world. But nevertheless, since the Torah is all about drawing in Oirein Seif HaBligvul, the infinite part of Hashem, not just drawing it, but drawing it into the physical world, and not only in the world, but literally in the lowest places, in the darkest places of the world. So therefore the Torah has the story of the creation of the world, and the same thing also all the other stories until Parshat Chodesh, because the goal is to bring in the infinite part of Hashem and the infinite part of Torah into the lowest places, and to make into the lowest and darkest places a dwelling place for Hashem. And that's why the Torah starts off with Bereshis, to tell us the power of the world, that Hashem created the world, physical world of concealment. And Hashem chooses to give this concealed world to whoever He chooses to. And the reason why the Torah has in it the story of creation, even though the creation is only a small ray of the powerful light of Hashem. And that's why it says, Anoichi, I'm the God that took you out of Egypt. It doesn't say the one that in the Ten Commandments took you out of Egypt. It doesn't say the one that created heaven and the earth, because obviously creating heaven and the earth is not so powerful. Because why is that? Because the ultimate purpose of Torah is that the Jewish people should transform the world and the people in the world, and you should make the whole world, Eretz Yisrael, the place that recognizes God. And the transformation should be in such a way that even the nations of the world will agree to it. And that's what we have to answer in their complaint. Because the goal is to bring the infinite light into finite places. And that's also one of the reasons that the Torah begins with Bereshis. Because the completion of making a dwelling place for Hashem down in this world, that the lowest place of the world, from the place itself, should be a vessel for God, that comes when the revelation is in a way where it's enclosed in the world. And there's a way where it's absorbed, and in Kabbalistic terminology it's called Milmata L'mayim, the world itself should feel it. And therefore the order of the way things are in the Torah, that by learning it in this manner we transform in a way of Milmata L'mayim, literally the physical world gets transformed by telling the story of creation. And which includes obviously the fact that we received as a gift from Hashem, and afterwards the story of the patriarchs, and afterwards only once we bring that powerful light into the world, then we have a Chodesh Hazel Lechem Reish Chadashim. So Rebbe explains this in more specific, and he says, based on what is explained in many Chassidic discourses, knows why the Torah doesn't start with a Chodesh Hazel Lechem and why it starts with Bereshis. So he brings a powerful teaching in Emek HaMelech, and he says in the beginning as follows. That when Hashem created the world, how did Hashem create the world? Hashem is infinite. The world is finite. He had to create a tzimtzum. He had to create a contraction. He had to create an emptiness. What's the idea of a tzimtzum? And the first tzimtzum, that the light that existed was totally got concealed. They created a big emptiness. And then after you had the empty space, Hashem drew in a light, and from there you were able to create space for the world. So in order to create the world, there had to be a tzimtzum, a contractional light. So, but when there's a contraction, there's no light. But the fact is that tzimtzum, what's the purpose of the concealment? That Afterwards, when we come down to this world and we learn Torah and we do the mitzvahs, where the goal is to bring the infinite part of Hashem into the world, to have an upgrade in the world. Because before Hashem did the contraction, when the infinite light filled the space, the world couldn't exist, and it wouldn't have been revealed in the world. But by creating the contraction of light, what God created was that the infinite part of Hashem could exist in the physical world. And not only that, through that we'll be able to reveal the internal part of the infinite part of Hashem, which is higher than the light of before the Tzimtzum. So what do we see from here? The same thing also, this that Hashem on his own decided to give it to them. In other words, the goal was to begin with that Hashem created the world and he's choosing who he's giving to, and this way we'll have an inheritance of the land of Israel on a whole different level. And we learn in the Torah, Bereshis bara Elokim, that the creation of the world was through Elokim, concealment. And the concealment of Shem Elokim, starting from the first Tzimtzum, what we do is we reveal the secret and the purpose of the concealment, that the purpose of the concealment is for the revelation. And the same thing also when we know when the moon was minimized, or when you had the sin of the tree of knowledge, and it's known that all the contractions and the breaking of the vessels and the minimizing of the moon and etc., they're all connected. That when you learn these ideas in Torah, what happens? What gets revealed is the internal intent that the goal is for the greater revelation that takes place afterwards. So based on this, we'll understand, this is what it says in the Torah, the whole story of the creation of the world, because Hashem is trying to tell us the power that Hashem created the world. It's not God forbid we're changing the Torah. In other words, that in order to know what to answer, that's why it's written in Torah. Things that obviously are not part of the Torah. No, because the fact is, this that we have the contraction of light, of Shem Elokim, and it's obviously not connected from the level of Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, which is the infinite part of Hashem. And we have that before the revelation of going out of Egypt and receiving the Torah. But after, when we have the revelation of going out of Egypt and receiving the Torah, HaChodesh is on the infinite part of Hashem, and you have the written, the creation of the world, and it's written in the Torah is to reveal to us the internal intent of the contraction, that we should have a much higher light. So by revealing the intent of the contraction, it's like every part of the Torah. You know, even though it's been clothed in physical things, it's all part of the Torah of Hashem, and it comes down into physical, materialistic things, is to bring in the infinite part of Torah into the lowest levels. And Rebbe continues on to say, you can say that same thing also applies in reference to the idea of what? The month of Tishrei and the month of Nisan. That the ultimate intent in the creation of Tishrei, Bereshis bara, and that's when the world is created in a finite way, is by when a person goes ahead and learns Torah and does mitzvahs, we'll be able to reveal the infinite part of Nisan, HaChodesh Elokim, into the world. And he liked to connect this with what's explained in other places in between the two different opinions of when the world was created. So you have the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer that when was the world created? It was created in the month of Tishrei. Technically on the 25th day of Elul, but connected to the month of Tishrei. And the opinion of Rabbi Yeshua that the world was created in the month of Nisan, technically on the 25th day of the month of Adar. Now the fact is they're both correct. So how can they both be correct? When was the world created? Tishrei and Nisan. And the answer is that in the month of Nisan, Hashem thought of creating the world. But the reality is the creation took place in the month of Tishrei. Now, based on what's known, that the intent of any action is the thought that comes first. So the world was created in Tishrei, but the thought was when? In Nisan. So you can say that this that Hashem's thought was to create the world when? In the month of Nisan. What does that mean? That the intent and the ultimate purpose of creating the world, which got created in the month of Tishrei, which is finite, that so that the revelation of the month of Nisan, which is above nature, should be in the world. But in order to fulfill that dream and that promise, that in the finite world you should have the revelation of infinite, so the creation had to happen when? In the month of Tishrei. This way you have a finite world. But by learning Torah and doing mitzvahs, we're able to bring into the world, the finite world, the revelation of the infinite part of Hashem. And the beginning of that started when we left Egypt with the mitzvah of Achodesh Zelachem. So based on this, Rebbe says he'd like to explain that's why after the Jewish people left Egypt and we received the Torah, then what happens is even the counting of the months now changes. Everything comes from Nisan. Why? Because even though the months of the year are revelations that are connected to the world, and the source of that comes from a light which is connected to the world, which is connected to, seemingly to the month of Tishrei, because the fact is, in the world you can't have the infinite part, but on the other hand, even the months of the year is all idea of a chodesh, which means revolutionary, and this that it comes in the world comes from a light that's connected to the world, which basically was an introduction to the ultimate revelation, which is basically the light which is above the world, which comes into the world. And the Rebbe says you can say that's why Chazal tell us that when Hashem chose the world, He established months and He established the year. So this that Hashem established in the world, heads of the different months, which basically is the opposite of world. World is finite, because Hashem chose in the physical world, that you can say that even the world He chose, which he should have the revelation of the intent of creation. In other words, that the creation was in a way that you should feel its intent. And when Hashem chose the world, He started to shine in the intent of creation, which the intent is that the infinite part of Hashem should be revealed in the world. However, before we left Egypt, everything was limited, everything was finite. So therefore, what was felt even in a month, which is revolutionary, but you felt that it was higher than the world, and therefore, what was the head of all the months? Then Tishrei was the head of the months. Even if it was a month, but Tishrei, that's the only thing we were able to grasp. But after we had the revelation of going out of Egypt, and when we received the Torah, what got revealed? That the revolutionary idea of the months is basically an introduction to the ultimate intent of going out of Egypt and receiving the Torah, and therefore now Nisan becomes the first of all the months, and even from the months from before Matan Torah, and all the counting starts from Nisan, because that's the ultimate goal, to bring in the infinite part into the world. Now, the fact is, the beginning of the revelation of the month of Nisan, which is basically the beginning of all the months, when does that start? That starts from Shabbos Mevarchim, the Shabbos that blesses the month of Nisan. And especially, the Rebbe says, like when the setup of the months is that Rosh Chodesh is in the beginning of the week. Then what happens is you read on Shabbos before Rosh Chodesh. It's called Shabbos Mevarchim. You read also Parshat Chodesh, and how much more so says when the way it's set up is that Rosh Chodesh is on Thursday, just like with the year when we left Egypt. And then what happens Shabbos Mevarchim of Nisan and Shabbos Chodesh is on the 25th day of month of Adar, which that's the day that Hashem had in thought to create the world. And the thought, that's the ultimate intent of creating the world, that even in the finite world of concealment, like the way it was created in reality in the month of Tishrei, what should be revealed is the infinite part of Hashem, and by doing that you'll fulfill the ultimate intent of creating a God should be revealed in the lowest places, and this revelation is going to be mainly with the coming of Mashiach. And as we know that in the month of Nisan we're going to be redeemed, and we were redeemed, and the month of Nisan we will be redeemed. The Rebbe finished off and he says as follows: Shmita will that even though we're right now in the month of Adar, when the Rebbe said the discourse, and the redemption of Purim is in a way that was still unfortunately slaves of Achashverosh. And just like, for example, that when Rosh Hashanah we stopped working, but we're still in Egypt, but nevertheless, since we are already on the 25th day of the month of Adar, which basically starts the beginning of Revelation of Nisan, so it's befitting and it's appropriate that the redemption should be in the month of Adar, and then when we come to the month of Nisan, we're already going to be in the level of redemption, like the famous teaching of the previous Rebbe that we say L'shana haba next year in Yerushalayim. And that we don't want to wait till next year. That means we should be redeemed now. By next year, for sure, we'll be in Yerushalayim. The same thing also when we're going to be, even though the redemption comes in Nisan, we get redeemed now, but then by Nisan we'll be redeemed. And then the Rebbe finishes off, and we're going to be redeemed, and then we'll go to Yerushalayim, and we'll be able to eat from all the different sacrifices in the temple. So again, another beautiful, powerful Chassidic discourse of the Rebbe about the ultimate purpose is to bring the infinite part of Hashem into this finite world. Let's hope and pray we do our job, and God willing, our next class will be in Yerushalayim, Ir Kodesh. Have a great and blessed week. Shavua Tov.